So it's a Thursday. We head on down to Cheyenne and Wyoming Liberty Group, and Steve Klein has been waiting on the phone. And Steve, I'm sure before, because you know this show is not just broadcast on radio stations, but it's video streamed on the internet as well, that we had to fill out all of the proper permits with the government in order to have the conversation that you and I are about to have. So I hope you got all the paperwork done and notarized on your end. Yeah.
More and more red tape and more of people just standing there saying, hey, man, it's just disclosure. What's your problem?
Oh, yeah, you have nothing to hide, so you should be okay, right? Unless you think you have something to hide. You don't have anything to hide there, do you, Steve?
Well, right. And you know what? The beauty of the more complex the forms, Glenn, the more minutia that you have to fill out, the more chances there are that you'll make a mistake. That even if you can afford the lawyers and accountants to help you figure all this stuff out, the more likely you are to make a mistake. And when you make a mistake, Glenn, that's bad for our democracy, so you need to be punished. And keep in mind, you're not being punished for speaking out. You're being punished because you didn't fill out the forms correctly. Huge difference.
By the way, before we tell people exactly what you and I are talking about, I was following closely in Houston, Texas, when the mayor, and she, of course, is throwing her lawyers under the bus on this one, but when the mayor stepped up and said, okay, all of the Christian churches in the area, I noticed she didn't go after the Muslim churches, have to disclose the content of and turn in all of the minister's sermons. And I don't know what happens if the minister speaks extemporaneously. And also any text messages and emails. And right away, people started shouting First Amendment. And then I found something interesting, Steve, and that is if you want to apply for a 501c3 status, almost said C3PO, status as a church, you have to give up certain fundamental rights in order to do it. So, for example, your church cannot talk about government or get involved in government activities. You promise. So you have to give away some of your rights to get tax-exempt status. It's an interesting trap that they've designed there, Steve.
Right, and this is, I mean, I should add that that's a 501c3 status that even applies to religious organizations, but to Wyoming Liberty Group, and that's what keeps your tax-deductible donations. You could always be a 501c4, but then you can talk a certain amount about politics or specifically about elections. On the religious side, it's kind of long been a very salutary type of thing that the government, until recently in Houston and certain other places, the government was smart enough not to go after ministers who would weigh in on an election. You know that politicians will often speak at, give maybe a guest sermon at certain churches, things like that nationwide, especially in the South. Even where I'm originally from Michigan, that was kind of a thing that a lot of different gubernatorial candidates do, and even when they spoke, they'd make it a point not to mention their election, while speaking. But of course, everyone knows they're running for office. So until the Houston, I'm glad the reaction was so swift and that it was firm. And it's interesting because Texas, you have things on one side or the other. That on one hand, you'll have people reacting very quickly, just like I don't think we talked about on your show, but Governor Rick Perry is facing a indictment by the Public Integrity Unit there for vetoing the funding of the Public Integrity Unit because they have a district attorney running it who was convicted of drunk driving, and then they turned that on him, and he had some lawyers come in and very quickly react to that. But then you have inquisitions like the Tom DeLay case, which only ended about a month ago, earlier this month, October, after 10 years, of prosecution and appeals, and so that's when things get really problematic, when they get dragged out like that. But again, I take hope in that I don't think they're going to be going after the churches anytime soon. But on the other hand, religion has already been so confined to there that as far as public policy goes, that it was a fascinating thing to see, but it was depressing. But meanwhile, we're moving into the much more egregious things that the Federal Election Commission seems to want to violate their own regulations and move into regulating the internet speech.
Well, and I've talked about this earlier this week, but let me set it up for you real quick. So, okay, the Federal Election Commission is a 6-membered body, and like all bureaucracy in government now, they have been given the power to write rules, which, as you and I, Steve, know are laws. And it starts with a group that decides to make a video, a commercial, but rather than put the commercial on television and pay for it, they put it up on YouTube for free. Well, now, is that a violation of federal law? Are they allowed to do that? That's what's at question here, right?
Yeah, currently the question is fairly unequivocal that the answer is that the regulations carve out the internet, and this was 10 years ago when they did their last rulemaking, 2005 or 6, regarding on whether they were going to regulate the internet and campaign advertisements on the internet. And the idea was even lofty so-called campaign finance reform groups like the Campaign Legal Center at the time said that, yeah, we need to keep the internet a nice free marketplace of ideas. You know, it's only television, radio, and every other medium that they really want the red tape to choke out. And that seemed a reasonable thing at the time and a good compromise, hands off. But then another one of these reform groups, the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which has about the same mission as Citizens Against the Common Cold, went ahead and filed a complaint against an organization called Checks and Balances for Economic Growth for having these commercials. And I think the organization was originally looking into running them on TV, which would put them under the purview of federal election law, but then they just produced these things and put them on YouTube. And I'm not sure if you could say they went viral, but they certainly caught the attention of Crew, and they filed a complaint, a very lengthy complaint with the Federal Election Commission, which is all these so-called reform groups exist to do when they're not trying to change the law or regulations, is they are filing complaints against, go figure, predominantly conservative groups and for what they're saying and wrapping them up in investigations. And the idea was that they were trying to get the Federal Election Commission to move in to investigate this organization, basically perform the equivalent of an audit and see what they were doing and if their speech violated the federal regs. To the credit of, usually it's the Democrats and the Office of General Counsel. So you have the appointed, there's 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans appointed to the Federal Election Commission. You usually have the 3 Democrats getting a very progressive opinion from the Office of General Counsel, the full-time bureaucrats, and they all end up agreeing. In this case, very, very, very interesting, the Office of General Counsel, the full-time lawyers said there's the regulations simply do not apply to this kind of the YouTube videos. And the Republicans agreed with that, and sure enough, 3 Democrats voted against it, against their own regulations. There was then a statement of reasons, and this is when things get really fun at the FEC, is there's, you know, you have your opinions and you have things and how a vote is cast, and commissioners can issue a statement of reasons. And in this case, one of the newest commissioners, the newest Democrat appointee, Ann Ravel, who comes from the lofty perches of the California Fair Political Practices Commission, which is a commission that actually makes the FEC look rather tame in some of its actions.
Yeah, I heard George Orwell roll over in his grave when you gave that name.
Yeah. And she wrote a statement of reasons, basically saying that the internet has changed in the last 10 years, and we really need to go ahead and open up a rulemaking process and hear from all the stakeholders, all the experts. I mean, this is great. Isn't it great when the appointed executive gets to come and listen to the voice of the people before making rules? I mean, yeah. It almost seems like we had a legislature to do that, as you mentioned earlier. But so it's a 2-page statement. It was interesting that it was not joined by the 2 Democrat commissioners, the 2 other ones. That's what's a little bit strange about this, is they all voted the way that they kind of wanted to investigate this Checks and Balances organization, and yet, as far as the statement of reasons, as far how far that Ravel wants to go, I'm not sure she has the support to do it. But it's bad news because you have these low disclosure thresholds already. You have, how great it is, and to be, truth be told, the Checks and Balances ads were a fairly good production value, and they're good ads. I've viewed both of them, both hitting out against Sherrod Brown over there in Ohio, and but states have already gone way too far and have kind of led the way as far as internet regulation. I wrote an article about a year ago on a case out of Maine where a guy wrote a blog that he spent maybe $90 on web hosting, and he got caught up in the red tape, and he was fined $200 for blogging anonymously. And that's He sued in federal court and he lost, and that's pretty much the
Well,
story right there.
here's
They're
what I
already
don't
doing
understand, but of course I don't think you and I can ever really, you know, you try to delve into this kind of thinking. I warn people about getting a brain tumor or suffering some kind of a seizure when you do. So in a free country, what is wrong with a group of people getting together and pooling their money and getting something produced that they can go ahead and put up on the internet? Why does anybody have to declare anything to the government? I don't understand why anyone in government thinks, oh, you have to declare that and file the following paperwork. Why? It's none of their business as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely. And that tension, I mean, is, I know it pays my wage, Glenn, and it's,
Yeah.
I've told you before, there's nothing more that I'd like to do than put myself out of business. I mean, I can't believe when you put it that way, you're not oversimplifying things. That is what it comes down to.
Well,
and this is more and more, we're finding the more red tape they can add to any type of speech, the more they will. And again, the objective is not to make politics cleaner, because it obviously doesn't. It's just as dirty as it's ever been. But now what you have, instead of having to hit back at your opponents in the political process, you have the law to turn to. Anytime, and like I say, these forms become so complex, and like you say, a lot of people assume, as they should, that they don't have to go filling out any forms before they speak out on the internet or on television or on radio or in newspaper ads. And yet all it takes is a very vigilant so-called reform group, take your pick, the Sunlight Foundation, the Crew, like I mentioned, Campaign Legal Center, and they will be there to file complaints against you with an agency like the Federal Election Commission, which you may have never heard of, and pretty soon, because you spoke out, you're stuck in this kind of enforcement process. And I'm more and more, I mean, this is fascinating. I can tell you today, Glenn, I'm filing a brief in Texas. I've got a guy who was actually breaking some campaign finance laws, and in a bad way, but he did it, and they ignored the law, and they charged him with bribery. He should have paid a $500,000 fine. Instead, he got sentenced to 14 years in prison for bribery. That's how bad it's getting. And again, this is, you know, I don't oppose all campaign finance laws. I'm not. I mean, I think as a matter of policy, we don't really need them. The country got along for 200 years without them. Things went okay, but the fact that we are now criminalizing, it's not just these civil penalties, it's not just red tape, it's not just fines because you don't fill out the forms or fill out the forms incorrectly, which people do all the time. Now we're talking crime. Now we're talking threats of jail time because you participated in the political process.
All right, Steve, I want to ask, right after we take a quick little commercial break here, what this means to the average little guy who's not with a political organization. Having to declare everything that you do in society, if you're talking politically anyway. And I wonder what this would, or how this would affect the average person, because I watch all the time videos, for example, on YouTube, and I read different blogs, and they're just from average Joe people who've decided that they have an opinion, and so they turn the camera on themselves, record themselves, and stick it up on YouTube. So with these new proposed regulations that so far, thank God, have been shut down, but it may have been shut down, but trust me, these people are not done trying to force them on us. Would this affect the average Joe slob out there who quite literally is typing up a blog in his pajamas?
Well, the question is they could, you know, and I got to tell you, Glenn, there's no proposed regulations right now. Right now, there's just a shot across the bow from one commissioner at the FEC saying she wants to have an extensive rulemaking process. The good news is last year, the IRS, following the IRS scandal, took it under their advisement that instead of laying off grassroots groups, they were going to pass new regulations. And there were so many comments, I think a record number of comments submitted to any agency, many of them in opposition, and the IRS backed off and said, we're not going to do anything on this, and that was relating to 501c4 organizations. They're not going to rock the boat. So there's certainly a chance that this might come to fruition at the federal level. Again, I think the 3 Republican commissioners right now are under no desire to let this go forward, even if in the informal process. But it's something, and I think the reaction, and we need to pay attention to it. And again, at the state level, the FEC is, has been, thankfully, the best part of it is that it is a bipartisan agency that is has the equal. It doesn't. We don't have an election czar, and that's probably the only good thing about that agency is that no one can act independently. The Republicans, when we have free speech respecting commissioners in there, you can stop bad things from happening, and that's actually been the way it's been for many years now. Having said that, at the state level, things have gotten very bad. Like I mentioned, in Maine, a guy spends $90 on a blog for web hosting for 6 months, and he gets fined for not filling out the forms. That's not money in politics anymore. That's anybody who wants to have a blog that has the right web capacity. So there's the problem. And the issue is, particularly here in Wyoming, we have had a lot of grumbling from certain candidates, from certain office holders about how we need to fix our campaign finance laws to have more and more disclosure. There's been criticism of certain organizations. Heck, I just heard a nice ad on in between there in the setting from Citizens to Protect Wyoming, whatever they're called. What's that? What's that, Glenn? Who's that?
Let me ask you this.
Let's task the Secretary of State's office with the power to start digging through everybody's records. So we really know who's behind
who they are, which is nothing but an intimidation tactic. But let me ask you this, though, because I've been curious, and you're the perfect guy to ask this kind of a question. So what if I decided, and a group of my friends decided, that we were going to put something together, and whether we buy television ads or put a blog up, whatever the case is, we just decide, we don't want this tax-exempt status. It's too much hassle. We're just going to say it. Do we get in any trouble, or do we have to file for that?
Well, any group of citizens getting together and paying money to expressly endorse a candidate is usually going to have to be a political committee under state law or federal law, depending on the kind of election. Under federal law, it's only a $1,000 threshold. Here in Wyoming, I can't tell you the threshold offhand, but I'm sure it's pretty low. I'm not even sure we have a threshold.
Right.
Forget the tax exemption has nothing to do with it.
Right.
It's they're already reaching you in most media, as far as television, radio, newspapers, mailers, things like that. I don't believe Wyoming law has ever tried to reach the internet. But again, when you have a state elections commission or a Secretary of State's office that gets too much gumption without having the law behind it, that hasn't always stopped them. So again, to the credit, here in Wyoming right now, I think things are actually quite good. I like our campaign finance laws. I like that the Secretary of State's office exists to help people comply with these laws rather than as an attack dog just sitting there waiting for somebody to screw up. So there's things aren't that bad in Wyoming right now, but the fact that these things are coming down the pipe is at the federal level and other states, and I'm not going to run out of business anytime soon.
No, that's unfortunate. No, I would love to see you forced into retirement. Where do people follow your work?
WhyLiberty.org.
All right, Steve. Thanks for coming on. Good information.
Thanks a lot.